We'll be fine, Luke. I mean, when has technology let me down recently?
I don't know.
Consistently. That's the answer. Consistently. And also, I'll tell you what the other thing is. At the library, at uni, they had those, an alarm that goes off when you try and take out a book without checking it out. And, it went off when I walked through it, and I was like, isn't that just typical? Like, with me and technology, if something can go wrong, it will go wrong.
That's
why
how
I don't
feel, Michael.
I don't know. Well, it's why I don't like public transport or anything, because it seems to me like it's always things. It just seems like an disproportionate amount of things go wrong when I do technology, and also I can't get behind this whole contactless, cashless society thing, because it just seems like a surprising amount of times like my credit cards debit cards I should say don't work and things like that.
What's the problem with just putting it in, sliding it in a credit card? It's like
Yeah.
Yeah, you get what I'm saying, don't you?
Yeah, just putting it in. What's the problem with just sliding it in, just to spit on it and then just in out?
Yeah, when I did that, the waitress thought it was
yeah. Yes.
Back up, chump, Biggie Smalls rips it quick and kicks it quick. You know how black niggas get. With the hoods, fatigues, with the boots, with trees. Flipping trees, making crazy cheese. Hitting buckshots at niggas that open spots on the avenue. Take my loot and I'm bagging. Pippin' hoes that drive Volvos and rodeos. Flash the roll, make a wet in they pantyhose. Damn, a nigga style is unorthodox. Grip the Glock when I walk down the crowded block. Just in case a nigga wanna act out, I just black out and blow their motherfucking back out. That's a real nigga for you.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of Select and Reflect, where we are going to be talking about the general problems with the Star Wars sequels, or Star Wars sequel trilogy, and the anthology films in betwixt them, although possibly not directly. And I guess you could say Disney's Star Wars, to be more general.
Yeah.
And I'm your host, Michael, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Luke.
Hello.
And you know what? I don't actually know what we're going to do at this point, Luke, because usually I would say, why don't you tell us a bit about this film? Then I'd say, do we like this film? And then we'd say, do we have any nitpicks? None of those things apply. So,
well,
what would you say, Luke?
So I'm just going to tell everyone why we would be doing something like this.
Good.
A whole
Thank
podcast on Star Wars, and of the Star Wars universe. And this is because The Last Jedi revealed some problems that I think were you could have seen them. You could have seen them coming, but The Last Jedi really revealed some big issues with the Star Wars universe, Star Wars fans, and also then we've just come off a new Star Wars movie, Solo: A Star Wars Story, which has been and gone. So it feels like we've got another year and a half until the next Star Wars movie. So it feels like a good time to just recap. We've had 4 Star Wars movies in effectively 2.5 years. So yeah, it feels like a good time to just reflect on the Star Wars universe, because there are some problems with The Last Jedi.
Yes.
And if you saw the Solo: A Star Wars Story's box office, it's just a disaster.
Disaster. Sad.
It's a disaster. Yeah, very sad. So I think it's a good time to talk about the Star Wars universe.
Yes. Before we do that, actually, Luke, let me tell you my facts I found out about The Last Jedi. You see, I mentioned very briefly a nitpick that a lot of people are having, or a plot hole, which is a lot of people were upset about the hyperspace kamikaze scene. Now, this isn't that interesting, but it's quite interesting. Well, it's interesting, but it's not that relevant. But I did find out why people don't like it, and I think it's kind of interesting. So that's why I'm going to tell you about it. You see, the problem is that in Star Wars, the way the kamikaze hyperspace thing is treated is it's treated as if hyperspace is just something that causes you to go really fast through space, which, of course, as we know, is scientifically impossible, because you can go really fast, but it's implied to be faster than the speed of light. Now, obviously, Star Wars does not marry itself to the laws of science. However, it does turn out that hyperspace has an established science to it in the Star Wars franchise, which is Do you know how warp speed works in Star Trek?
No, I don't know.
I just think it's fun. It's pretty basic. So obviously, like I say, you can't travel faster than the speed of light because of Einstein something. I don't really understand it. But the way warp speed works in Star Trek is that it basically collapses space in front of it and expands space behind it. So it's not actually technically moving, it's just manipulating matter, which is interesting. But the way hyperspace works is that actually when things go into hyperspace, they go into a separate dimension where I think it's one of these two things. Either the laws of physics are different, so you can go really, really fast, or, and this might be what it actually is, obviously then you teleport into the real dimension when you reach your end destination. And I think it could be that the hyperspace is kind of a collapsed, condensed version of real space. So you've got hyperspace, which is somewhere you can go really fast. The point is, Luke, that the reason why the kamikaze scene doesn't work is that hyperspace isn't just traveling really fast through real space. Hyperspace is a place that you enter. That's why they go into hyperspace. It's a place that you physically enter, and then you travel to where you want to go faster than the speed of light, breaking every known law of physics, and then you re-emerge. And that's why the kamikaze scene doesn't work.
I swear we discussed this in The Last Jedi.
We did. Well, we discussed it. We didn't discuss the actual reason why people, because I thought people didn't like it because what I'd heard people saying was, well, why doesn't everyone just use that tactic? Which is kind of a good point, but I haven't heard this, and I just think that's interesting, to be honest. I don't think it makes the film worse, but I think it's interesting that that's how hyperspace works. We love hyperspace, don't we?
Yes, fair enough. So, what do you want to talk about first then, Michael? In the Star Wars universe, what's your first point?
The first thing that we should start with is, let's start with the world building. What about that? Okay. No, I don't want to do that. I want to do the irrelevance of this film. Okay. These films. The problem to me with these films is that you watch them and you're thinking to yourself, like, why does this matter? What was any of this, being built up to? And it is kind of weird because obviously, there are a lot of films that have, enduring plot lines or things like, for example, James Bond. Obviously, they were not planning Skyfall back when they made The Spy Who Loved Me. Yeah. It wasn't. But the thing is there, obviously it works because each James Bond film is just a separate adventure. The problem with these films is that I remember when these films were coming out, somebody said the worst thing that The Force Awakens could be is just a movie. And that's something that obviously kind of makes sense because Star Wars is this thing where everyone goes crazy over it, and it's just a movie. And the thing is, I think part of the reason is it's like, oh, this is this grand, epic space adventure, and yet it's like you're just slapped in the face by the fact that it doesn't feel like this is where the grand epic narrative was leading. It wasn't.
Are you talking about after Return of the Jedi?
Yeah, after Return of the Jedi. But I mean, the weird thing is, for example, that obviously the prequels felt relevant, even though they were terrible. They felt like, oh, this makes sense. This is where these characters, or not necessarily make sense, but you felt like, okay, I care about, say, Obi-Wan. Ewan McGregor was one of the better parts of the prequels. So you're like, oh, I care about that. But with this, I mean, I think it's just so difficult to start with the premise of, I liked the original Star Wars films, and from that in any way get to the conclusion of, therefore, these new films matter.
Okay, well, here's the thing. Like, if you're going to do an episode 7, I think you need to just have a reset. Like, yeah, it does kind of make the original trilogy worthless, like you said, because, straight away, the First Order has risen again, or the Empire, whatever, and the Rebellion or the Resistance or the Senate or the Republic, whatever, has again fallen, like 20 years later. And the thing is, like, it was the perfect end at the end of the Jedi. They wrapped it up with a neat little bow. Han Solo, Leia, and Luke, Chewbacca, all sitting there smiling. But that was it. You can't really continue along a narrative because the narrative stopped. So you have to just do a reset and just start again. And so that's why maybe it just felt like another movie, and it felt separated from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But I think
I was going to say, sorry. I think the big problem is that it then kind of relies on nostalgia and kind of appeals to the original trilogy to give it more weight. And I think that's kind of the disconnect. And I think that's kind of a bit of a disconnect that's becoming worse with the soft reboot thing, is that it's like simultaneously saying, oh, we're starting our new thing. But then it's like, oh, but, here's Luke Skywalker. Everyone loves Luke Skywalker.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Michael, because originally when I heard they were doing Episode 7, I did not think that they were going to bring back Han Solo, Leia, and Luke Skywalker. I didn't think so. I'll just finish it. I just thought they were going to basically start fresh, start new characters. Those original 3 characters weren't going to be in it. And so when I read a news story about how they've got them all back together, I was really surprised. I was like, oh wow, I did not think that these people would be in this movie. And it was just like assumed that they would be. But I mean, yeah, if I was creating Episode 7, my initial thought would be no Luke Skywalker, no Han Solo, no Princess Leia. So yeah, you have got a point there. There is a disconnect right there.
And I think I was going to say the only way it could have worked, and this is actually one of the better things about this film that I'm going to mention, is they could have done it in a Star Trek 2009 way. Because have you seen Star Trek 2009?
Yes, I have.
So obviously Spock meets his future self, and his future self is played by Leonard Nimoy, and that is it's a good nod. It's a good way of saying, it's a good way of handing over the reins to this new series. But I think so I can imagine kind of
well, that's a remake though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a remake. So obviously, I agree.
So there is
that it's different, yeah. But yeah, I can imagine, so for example, having, say, all new characters, but then they go and see, say, a statue of Luke Skywalker. And it's like, oh, look, it's a statue of Luke Skywalker. The problem is, it's kind of, it's, you could say it doesn't give this new film room to breathe.
No, yeah. So obviously you're right. They should have either continued on the narrative from Episode 6, which I guess, well, like I said, I think it's impossible to do so. So the only thing they should have done then is not had these 3 characters in there. But again, like, think of the amount of money that having Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Princess Leia in your movie, the amount of money it will generate. And think of, the fans that you want to get back on board with Star Wars, the ones that deserted Star Wars because of the prequels. Hey, guess what? We've got a new fun adventure with these characters, apart from Luke Skywalker, who was actually in Episode 7, apart from the last 10 seconds. But, they didn't know that going into the movie, and they still get to see Han Solo. So it's, obviously, if you're just telling a story, the best thing would be to leave out those characters, because that's the only option. But because of financial concerns, I guess they can't do it.
Anyway, I think we said enough about that. So you can move on to what do you want to say about next, Luke?
Well, we could talk about...
do world building?
Yeah, world building. Yeah, that would be a good place to
say that, yes, because that's what I did mention. In fact, actually, I accidentally crossed out world building. I'm crossing out things as we go along, and I just... world building, yeah, Luke, what's your general opinion on world building? So... as a concept?
So, well, as a concept, or as
no, not really.
Star Wars?
Is it in Star Wars?
In Star Wars. So, Star Wars, as has been mentioned by Rich Evans, as you pointed out, and yourself, it's a very limited universe. You can't really do a lot. And this just goes outside, like TIE fighters and lightsabers or whatever, because I think you could have different things to TIE fighters. Maybe lightsabers are iconic, so you have to keep them in. But the reason why it's limited is it always has to be a battle for the galaxy between good and evil. You can't do anything else apart from that. So that right there suggests, well, that's a problem, because, if you want to keep having Star Wars episodes made, they're all going to be very similar. But here's the thing. I don't think that's that big of a problem. And this is where I think we touched on this in The Last Jedi, and we may have had a disagreement, I can't remember. But basically, people like to see the limited stuff. They like to see the same things over and over again. That's why people like Star Wars. It's the epic battle between good and evil. And if you want to try something new, something different, people aren't going to like it, and people aren't going to go see it. I mean, The Force Awakens made $2 billion at the box office. I don't think that there is any reason to change it, because it made money, audience liked it, it was a competent movie, but you don't need to change the formula if things are, being successful for you. So I think the limited world building, the battle between good and evil, Kylo Ren versus Rey, and then you got Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker, these tropes over and over again, they're not necessarily that bad. I'm not against it on the whole. What do you think about that?
Well, you know what, actually, you've kind of moved into one of my other points, which I think I'll just talk about now, and then I do have a few things to say about other elements of world building, actually. But
Yeah, sure.
So I wrote down simple fantasy themes, and I kind of have two things. You were talking about kind of ways that you can have a good film or a successful film that goes off of very simple fantasy themes. And I think there are basically two effective ways to make a good film that has, or a good film series, I should say, that has simple fantasy themes. And I think your first one is to have a larger evil that connects everything. So rather than having it be, and the weird thing is Star Wars gets close to this in some way, because of course it's, the dark side versus the light side, which works if you establish kind of the dark side as the ultimate antagonist. And the example I'm thinking of for, larger evils would be something like Harry Potter, where, at least in the first 1 to 4, films 1 to 4, there are smaller challenges and kind of smaller problems, but there is a larger evil, and that kind of keeps you interested. So if Star Wars operated on this system of kind of, a very clear idea of what we're fighting is the dark side, each individual kind of episode or trilogy is dealing with a specific manifestation of the dark side. So you say it's not, because the problem is if you establish it between the Empire and the Rebels, and the Empire is the ultimate evil, there's nothing more evil than the Empire, then obviously they defeat the Empire, and like, I guess you can imagine, you don't really know where to go from there. And of course the cleverer way to do it would be to have some kind of hint at, well, the Empire isn't the problem, there is a larger problem. And obviously even then that would have its limits, because there would be a point at which you're like, okay, when are they going to defeat this? But that would at least leave you, free for a few extra films. And yeah, you say anything you want to say about that, because I do have an extra thing to say.
No, yeah, you're right. So the dark side means that you can have multiple movies where they are trying to defeat the Empire. That's a good point, actually. So it's not necessarily the Empire or the First Order, it's the dark side. Like, if you were to do a Harry Potter, like 7 Harry Potter sequels, maybe his kid, whatever his name is.
Rubus. Oh, his kids have got horrible names.
It's like Albert.
Albus, Rebus, Sirius. I think one of them's got the middle name Severus.
Severus, yes. The thing is, like, you can't necessarily do like another Voldemort, because Voldemort was going to be the most evil wizard ever, and there's dark magic, but there's not really a dark side in the Harry Potter universe, so it's pretty difficult to have like a reboot of that, because like you said, it's just Voldemort. He's the epitome of evil. On the Star Wars universe, right, you've got the dark side, and obviously then you can have multiple movies, because there can be like the dark side can never be defeated.
Yes. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that, and I was thinking about, of course, another classic, possibly you might even say definitive, if not definitive alongside Star Wars, tale of good versus evil, which is the Lord of the Rings films.
I was thinking you were going to bring that up. Yeah,
the Lord of the Rings films are really good, and I guess so there's kind of two lessons you can learn from, first of all, the Lord of the Rings films, and second of all, the larger Tolkien narrative. So, I'm just going to explain the very basics of the larger Tolkien narrative. I'm going to do it surprisingly quickly. So there are 3 basic books that make up the Tolkien narrative: The Silmarillion, The Hobbit, and The Lord of the Rings. Now, I'm guessing you know The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. All you need to know about Silmarillion is that there are these gods, 13 of them. One of them is called Melkor. Melkor is evil, and he is, the god of evil, and he basically steals these things called the Silmarils from an elf called Fëanor. Fëanor then says, I'm going to fight a war against Melkor, and that is basically the plot. Now, 2 good things about the Tolkien franchise. I'm going to, just call it the Tolkien mythos. Number 1, it sets up larger evils in each film. So, or each film, each story. So, for example, Sauron is originally an apprentice of one of the good gods. And then he basically betrays the good gods and joins Melkor. And so Sauron is basically the right-hand man of the god of all evil, basically is how it's set up. which means obviously, you know, if you read the Tolkien mythos chronologically, you have God of all evil has his, you know, assistant Sauron. God of evil gets defeated. Sauron rises up from the ashes, takes his place, and it flows perfectly because, you know, you had this guy he starts off as a hero, then he joins the bad guy dies, he takes the bad guy's place. And obviously, you know, it's a very large, sprawling narrative. And then, of course, for example, Sauron is being set up in The Hobbit. Those great trilogies. Yes. And the second lesson you can learn from the Tolkien mythos is good or interesting heroes. Because heroes can be interesting, and this is something that I think probably Tolkien is more suited to do than Star Wars. But obviously, for example, you have someone like Denethor, and if you don't know who that is, he is the old guy who's in charge of Minas Tirith in the third film, kind of the guy who goes crazy and he hates his son and he's Boromir's dad. I don't know how well you know him, but the thing is basically he's crazy, so he's on the good guy's side and he is, you know, he's not actively evil, but the problem is basically he's crazy. And more interestingly, you have someone like Fëanor. Fëanor's whole thing is that he is a good guy, but he is incredibly arrogant. And he basically, even though he is the person who declares war on Melkor, he is kind of so fixated on the idea that he's going to be the one who defeats him and he's going to go get back these magical jewels he's made and all that stuff, that he causes a lot of problems. And he actually kills some elves and things like that. Okay. The important thing is, Luke, interesting heroes.
The overall point, yeah.
Yes, interesting heroes. So yeah, those are the two lessons, very simply. Setting up, well, 3 lessons, I guess. Number 1, have a larger, coherent evil force would be good, which is obviously the dark side. Number 2, set up evils. Like, none of this would be a problem if in the original trilogy they had set up the idea that there was someone who could realistically take Darth Sidious's place, or the Emperor's place.
Well, they couldn't do that, could they?
They couldn't have, they couldn't have done it without planning ahead. And then, of course, number 3, have more interesting heroes. And they kind of do this to some extent. Like, for example, I mean, in Rogue One, the good guys, the council, doesn't vote to help out Rogue One, the team, because democracy is terrible. And, you know, things like that. But yeah, those are my lessons on simple fantasy themes.
So you're saying that Tolkien mythos or whatever is a good example of basically creating this fantasy world and having the same sort of limited structure.
Yes.
And it still being compelling to watch and still, you know, wanting to go see the movies over and over again, or read the stories over and over again.
Yeah.
It is possible to do so, yeah.
Yes. Also, the Bible.
No.
There we go. Well, to be fair, the Bible is, if you were to make the Bible into a series of films, they would be very long, and you can't. One thing you can't deny about the Bible is it certainly does have one coherent force of evil called the devil. Anyway, but I actually want to say something else about world building, which
go for it.
I think is a maybe minor criticism, but there's a bit of a meme around Star Wars, which is that the worlds themselves are kind of boring. So because you have desert planet, swamp planet, ice planet, city planet,
yeah.
forest planet, and I think
Did you say water planet?
Oh yeah, water planet, Kamino.
Cloud planet.
Cloud planet. That's true. Planet made up of clouds. I don't know if that planet actually has a. I don't know if it's supposed to be like a gaseous planet, because obviously gaseous planets do exist, like
Uranus. His lightsaber fell to the floor.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, because that's what I was thinking. I feel like when they originally wrote it, it was probably intended to be like Uranus.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway, but obviously, I think that kind of has problems for how compelling the narrative is, and the reason I say that is that the real world, Luke, in case you haven't noticed, unless you're a Marxist or a fascist or a liberal, which is basically the only 3 things you can be, doesn't have a good side and a bad side. There's not like, I mean, and obviously sometimes it does, but generally speaking, for example, if you look at any given war in history, say the Greco-Persian War, realistically, any attempt to say, well, these guys are the bad guys and these guys are the good guys is just a an artifact of embellishment on the part of the person telling the story. So obviously Greeks will tell the story as the Greeks are the heroes. But the point is that if you have interesting worlds and interesting societies and unique cultures, then they don't necessarily need to fit into good versus bad in order to be interesting. So, for example, I'll take this. The most interesting planet in the entire Star Wars mythos is Naboo, because you have the Gungans, who are kind of not allied with and somewhat antagonistic towards the actual human, and that kind of makes it an interesting world. And I think in the expanded universe, which doesn't exist anymore, they have things like, civil wars on certain planets and stuff like that. And obviously I think the universe would benefit if, even if you didn't really care about the massive grand narrative story, or you, say, had to limit the massive grand narrative story because it was getting a bit repetitive, it was exciting. You felt like the characters were exploring a fleshed out universe. Whereas it kind of seems to me like every single time they go somewhere, that place was literally invented on the spot. They were like, oh, the characters have to go somewhere. Casino planet. You don't get the feeling that the casino planet existed in the ether of the Star Wars universe immemorial.
Yeah, so obviously I think you care about world building more than me, and more than the average Star Wars, or maybe not average Star Wars fan, but the average Star Wars moviegoer. But yeah, I think that's a good point. The world building in the sequels has been awful. And we talked about this before. It's because obviously the prequels, the world building, I think was pretty good. Although you did have your standard planets, you had the ocean planet in Camino, for instance. But overall, they went to a lot of worlds, and I think it was very good when it came to world building. That's why I liked it as a kid. But yeah, these sequels, the world building is atrocious. Yes. And again, the average critic doesn't care, the average moviegoer doesn't care. But for people who want to, I guess, who like this kind of stuff, who like world building, it would be really nice to have a detailed and thought out.
Yes, I will say actually, just for the record, I wouldn't care, or I didn't care, in the context of the original trilogy, because in the original trilogy, if it was just the original trilogy, then it would be fine, because ultimately you say, okay, we've got a battle between good and evil, and all of the planets they go to are really just kind of I'm trying to think what the word is, circumstantial, they just happen to be where the battles are happening. And obviously that's it works with the kind of simple themes. I think the world building causes more of a kind of hit to the franchise when it starts to kind of be like, oh wait, this is, we have to be more interesting than just another good guys versus bad guys story. And then it gets a bit more kind of tangible. What else have you got written down as something to talk about? Have you got?
Well, I just wanted to talk about the problems with the sequels.
All right, okay. See, well, we've just been talking about the problems with the sequels this whole time, Luke.
Well, okay, but the specific problems, the primary problem with the sequels.
Is that the lack of planning?
Yes, it is.
All right, tell you what, Luke, we will talk about that. Although I do have a few other things that I could mention after that, but we'll talk about this.
About world building.
Let me see what else I've got. Okay, see, I have. I'll just go through all these things because a lot of these things are kind of very basic. In fact, one of them, I've really covered, so let's ignore that. Actually, no, I do want to talk about this a bit more. This is also related to world building, but I didn't write it under world building. I wish that they would kind of develop or have a more coherent idea of the specifics of the dark side and the light side. I wrote this under mythos, which is obviously a bit of a nebulous term.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about this.
Because I think, obviously, again, this kind of falls under the question of, you need to have an enduring idea of what the dark side is and what the light side is in order to make the franchise-wide battle between the two interesting. And the problem is it's something that you notice when you see people kind of when the dark side and the light side get treated as things that can actually be evaluated. So just kind of to move away from the sequels for a minute, when Anakin Skywalker moves to the dark side, the stated reason is that the dark side lets you experience your emotions, whereas the light side causes you to suppress your emotions. That's kind of the basic thing that drags Anakin Skywalker towards the dark side. But of course you realize that is just not really true. The dark side is not filled with people who have happy families and, there doesn't seem to be, the dark side is not somewhere where you get the impression that everyone is experiencing a vast cocktail of emotions. So it kind of seems as if and this has kind of been one of my criticisms one of many of my criticisms of prequels, that everything that's kind of set up to entice Anakin towards the dark side seems like it's just completely at odds with how the dark side is portrayed in the rest of the franchise. And it makes Anakin look like a complete moron. Because he's like, hey, I want to join the dark side to save Padme. And then he's like, okay, kill these little kids. And he's like, alright. It's basically the ultimate bait and switch. It's like, hey, you want to marry your wife and have kids with her and things like that? Yeah, I do. Well, switch it around with some killing kids. Oh, guess I've got to do that now. That's the prequels. I'll just say quickly. And then in the sequels, of course, you have this big thing in The Last Jedi where Luke is saying, let me tell you why the dark side and the light side are both wrong. And he's kind of like talking about all this stuff, but you're like, hold on a minute, the dark side and the light side have not been established as coherent ideologies. And he's kind of talking about, like, look, it's the ancient Jedi texts. And you're like, hold on a minute, what do you mean ancient Jedi texts? Literally, there's not been any kind of established tenets. Like, what are the essential beliefs of the light side and what are the essential beliefs of the dark side? When you really break it down, it seems to be just one of them likes to wear black a lot. So yeah, when you've got Luke Skywalker kind of making this profound philosophical discussion about how, that they both need to be destroyed and things like that, you're like, hold on, I don't know anything about either of these ideologies.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're right. I think the prequels certainly took the mystique out of the Force.
Midichlorians.
Obviously, midichlorians. That's the obvious example. But yeah, you're right in how they displayed like Anakin's turning to the dark side as well. Also, I think the dark side has one ideology, which I think is power.
Yeah.
I think that is the one tenet to the dark side.
Yes. No, sorry, I was just going to say that, and that doesn't work because, of course, Anakin's big thing. I mean, yes, obviously he wants the power to save Padme, but it's a very distinct type of power. And then, if his motivation is getting that power, then why doesn't he, actually try and get that power? Why does he just go, oh, I'm evil now? Anyway, yeah, what were you going to say? I did cut you off.
Yeah, so the sequels, I think, also took some of the mystique out of the Force as well. Particularly with Luke Skywalker and like the Jedi text and him explaining like the Jedi needs to die and all that. I just thought like that in general was just like it just felt like, okay, so the Force, the light side, the dark side, it's not that important anymore. And I think the Force relies on its mystique for its importance. That's what makes it so interesting. The spirituality of Star Wars, I don't think can be taken out because that's one of the key factors. That's why I think the original trilogy was so successful. Yeah.
You know what, Luke? I'm also going to have to do that thing where I make a comparison to another thing. So there's a show, perhaps you've heard of it, called Avatar: The Last Airbender.
I've seen it.
One of the interesting things that they kind of do is, obviously, I guess that people have the ability to bend certain elements. And one of the kind of things that they also have is that each nation and kind of religion, because they are a bit like religions, have their own philosophy, and the philosophies are kind of relevant. So, for example, the Fire Nation has an ideology of the importance of kind of destruction and rebuilding, which makes sense because fire is a very kind of destructive force. Whereas kind of the water people have an idea of moving with the flow. I mean, the rock people have a theology of kind of staying still, staying put, because rock is, it's very basic, but it is interesting because it allows you to actually think, okay, so, this is the group's motivation. So when the Fire Nation does something bad, like invade an entire, continent, it's because they're motivated by that specific thing. And I think, like I say, again, it falls under the category of if it was just the original trilogy, it wouldn't matter because, it can just be, this is evil and this is good. But when you kind of have things like, for example, when you want to expand the sentence, Darth Vader was seduced by the dark side, to an entire film, you actually incur an obligation to establish what is the dark side, why would a good person want to join it?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then, I guess on that note, I will just say, I think the problem, and I think this is a very general thing, but sequels had a problem, which is that they were not picking up from a good place. They were picking up the Star Wars story from something that was generally considered quite unpopular, and I think that kind of caused a lot of. I mean, you pointed out, for example, that in the first film, the seventh film, the first film of the new sequel trilogy, they tried to play it safe, as safe as they could, which makes sense given what happened with the prequels, but obviously, in a way, that kind of doomed them because it made it, necessarily. And also, I think the fact that, it
made it necessarily what? Sorry.
It made it kind of so they didn't have as many, as much confidence or integrity in kind of like saying this is what we're going to do, because the last guy who said this is what I'm going to do and was really forceful about it ended up making a big pile of crap.
Did you actually hear what George Lucas said about his ideas of the sequels?
No, I'm interested.
It came out like 2 days ago.
Oh, okay.
He talked about the Guardians of the Worlds, and basically what his plan was to explain the Force more, like explain midichlorians more, and that kind of thing, which again would be like an even worse idea than the sequel so far.
Yes. So, I'm not. There are some people who actually think that George Lucas should be making, like, people who haven't worked out that the prequels are bad yet. People like us who grew up with the prequels and used to think it was good, but they haven't worked out that they're terrible yet.
No, yeah.
Anyway, and now you can move on to your final biggest problem.
Michael, obviously, when they announced they were doing episode 7, 8, and 9, I was initially excited because I thought, like, okay, they're not going to mess it up like the prequels, and there is a formula with 4, 5, and 6 that they can stick to, but obviously not directly copy it, like I thought they would with The Force Awakens. Like they did with The Force Awakens. But anyway, basically I was excited because I was like, we're probably going to get 3 really good quality Star Wars movies that are going to be fun, that are going to be enjoyable. Unfortunately, so far that has not happened from our ratings. You can probably tell. I mean, I gave Force Awakens a 6, and I believe I gave The Last Jedi a 4.5 out of 10. You didn't rate them.
No, yeah, I put them very close to each other, but all in the kind of bad category, I would say.
Yeah, and that is disappointing. And I think the major, obviously, The Force Awakens is just a rehash of A New Hope, basically. But what really is disappointing was The Last Jedi, because there was a sense that after Force Awakens, there would be a chance now to move on to in a new direction. Like they've got the first movie, and now we're going to go on to something more, something better, something that is going to be original but still very good. And I was looking forward to episode 8 because of that. I thought it was going to be good, but it wasn't. And episode 9 probably again is not going to be very good either. As we've discussed, we've both said if episode 9 is a good movie, it'll be a freaking miracle. Yeah. And this all comes down to lack of planning. The major problem with these Star Wars sequels, lack of planning. So it's just crazy that Disney, who are so meticulous, well, I'd imagine they are with so many things, that they did not bother to plan out the Star Wars universe, or the Star Wars sequels, sorry. Particularly because they've got Marvel, who, right at the same time, are planning out their movies in a very meticulous, intricate way, and they're getting a lot of success because of it. So to not plan out your movies is unbelievably
negligent.
Negligent, that's it. Yes, from Disney. If you were watching episode 7 and episode 8, like in a marathon,
yes.
How some people watch these Star Wars episodes. I remember when just before Force Awakens came out, there was like people watching like episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and marathons and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. I wouldn't do that, but each their own. It occurred to me after watching episode 8, Michael, like if you were to watch episode 7 and 8 in a row, like in one of these marathon sessions, and you're not getting the cinematic experience, like it would be like, oh wow, so all that stuff was pointless in episode 7. And we talked about this in The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
But really, like, there's no story due to the lack of planning caused by obviously the change in directors. That's why episode 7 and episode 8 is so different, the changing of the directors. Obviously from J.J. Abrams to Rian Johnson. Episode 8 is the central piece in the trilogy. and I think it's the worst place to have a new director. So J.J. Abrams will be directing episode 9. But obviously, like, the episode 8 is meant to be like the meat. It's meant to be where all the stuff really happens that sets the story. Like, it's probably the most important episode in a trilogy if you want to do it right. Would you not agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, first of all, you're right about everything you just said. One thing I actually want to bring up, because I think there's an interesting comparison, because I think you may be aware that you said the central part of the trilogy is the worst place to have a new director. Empire Strikes Back was actually directed by someone who wasn't George Lucas. It was directed by a guy called, I feel like it's Irvin Kershner, but don't hold me to that.
I should have.
Well, yeah, but I actually wanted to kind of go off that, because I can imagine what a lot of people say is that because if you watch A New Hope, a lot of people say, well, hold on a minute, A New Hope originally was written with the possibility of it just being, a one Star Wars film, because it was obviously released originally as The Star Wars, and the people say, well, they only started fleshing out, like, for example, the whole Darth Vader being Luke's father thing, I think I'm right in saying, was actually planned out after. I said, I can't say whether or not it was in George Lucas' mind. Here's the thing, though, okay, and this is what makes it different. The fact that A New Hope works as a standalone film. If no other film, if A New Hope was made, and for some reason, in some insane way, no other film was made after that, you would be left with a film that, yes, it did leave a larger story unaccounted for. Obviously, Darth Vader didn't die at the end. The Empire wasn't completely defeated, but it would still be a complete, coherent story, and you wouldn't be left, for example, going, well, who was Luke's real parents? You wouldn't be left with any questions, because it's not as if Episode 4 said, these questions matter. Whereas if you watch The Force Awakens, and, all this stuff, you'd be like, obviously this is going to set something up, and that's why, New Hope worked perfectly, because you could watch it as its own film. So therefore, if you bring in a new director for the 5th film, then that's kind of fine, because they don't have any expectations left from the previous film. Yes. They couldn't have done this with this new sequel trilogy.
No, because it sets so much stuff up in Episode 7. Like, obviously, Episode 8 relies, I think, on the shock value. But
yes,
if it relies on, like, shocking people, then it's not very rewatchable. Because if that's the only reason to watch it, like I said, if you're watching this movie, Episode 8 in 20 years' time, like, oh yeah, load of shit happens which is different to Episode 7, but I already know this. What is the point in me watching The Last Jedi again? It's good for a one-time cinematic experience if you like the expectations being subverted, which obviously I didn't for the most part, but, if you like that, I guess it's good for the first time, but rewatchability is very low. And of course, I think Star Wars, that's something that it thrives on, rewatchability, as any action-adventure movie does. I think, so basically I use this analogy, Michael, and I think it's pretty good. Like, J.J. Abrams, he set the table for the Star Wars sequel, and Rian Johnson came in and threw it on the floor.
Yes.
Like all the cups, the fucking gravy, just tossed it all on the floor, and then said, didn't expect that, did you?
No, it is,
well, basically what happened, the major problem with this lack of planning is, obviously, there's no story. The Star Wars trilogy, unlike other sequels or trilogies, for example, Ocean's 11, or the Ocean's trilogy, or Transformers, is that, that there is meant to be some planning. There is meant to be an overall story.
Like Lord of the Rings.
Like Lord of the Rings. With most stories, or with most sequels, you just, after the movie gets made, you come up with a new idea. Like, oh, what about if the characters went and did this instead? Like, obviously, the Ocean's
Grown Ups too. That is home too. What if Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg's dad showed up?
Yeah, it's like, what can we do for a sequel? Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg's dad show up. Yeah, that shouldn't be the thinking going into a Star Wars movie, because you're getting 3 episodes at a time, so they should do all 3 episodes at one time.
Yeah,
which is just it makes sense. You're meant to be able to watch these 3 back to back, and for there to be a coherent story. What interested me actually, Michael, is I watched this video, and I think it was on the Mr. Plinkett review of The Force Awakens, and it was Kathleen Kennedy. Kathleen Kennedy speaking, and she said that she treated Star Wars like any other blockbuster movie, which is completely the wrong approach. Star Wars isn't like any other blockbuster. It's like Lord of the Rings. It's special. It's different. There's 3 episodes you've got to pump out in a row. You can't treat it like I don't know. Think of a random blockbuster.
No, I thought of Indiana
Jaws?
Jones. That doesn't work. Yeah, Jaws.
Jaws. That's just the original blockbuster, or Independence Day.
Yeah.
Like these massive Hollywood blockbusters, and Star Wars, I guess, is. But like I said, it's meant to be a trilogy. You can't treat it like a normal blockbuster movie. You've got to treat it differently. You've got to have more planning, more foresight. Stuff like what has happened happens. You get a movie in episode 8 which is completely does not mesh with episode 7. It does not fit in with episode 7. It feels like this isn't the same director, this isn't the same story, which is obviously correct. So I don't know why or they didn't like that. And by the way, Rian Johnson, yes, you mentioned episode 5 was different to episode 4 in directors, but crucially as well, Rian Johnson wrote and directed episode 8.
Yeah.
So that is he had total control over episode 8, but he had nothing to do with episode 7. While I imagine the writers for episode 4 and 5 were similar.
Yes, I think there was. In fact, I think it was kind of almost an accident that Irvin Kershner ended up taking over. So I think it was a bit of a caretaker thing. Yeah. It's. You're right. I mean, it is so much about the fact that. Like, it's bizarre because I think as actually I'm probably just about to go into, I would say that they should not only be planning out, and also, I mean, for example, you mentioned that if they want their trilogies to feel relevant to each other, they should be even setting up the next trilogy. So they should have been setting up the sequel trilogy in the original trilogy. If the original trilogy could have been remade or whatever, and yet they haven't even done the minimum, which is setting up the next film in the trilogy. Well, they've been setting up the next film in the trilogy, but then they haven't been, they haven't planned out.
Yeah, there's nothing to carry on over into that movie. And like Rian Johnson, okay, I get he wanted to do his own thing, but I still don't have respect for the decision he made, because it was the wrong thing to do, because he should have appreciated that this is a trilogy. It's not a standalone movie. It's not just another sequel. And before I hand over to you, Michael, I just want to ask a question, a rhetorical question. What are these sequels about? So Star Wars trilogies, I think, need to be about something. Like in the original trilogy, Luke becomes a Jedi and the Empire falls to the rebellion. And in the prequels, although it's poorly executed, it's about Anakin becoming Darth Vader and the Republic falling to the Empire. That is what those trilogies are about. What are these sequels about? Like Rey trying to go turning to the light side and Kylo to the dark. But I mean, I don't know. Like they don't know either. Like there's, what is the equivalent in these sequels to Luke becoming a Jedi or Anakin becoming Darth Vader? What's the equivalent in these sequels?
Oh goodness me. Do you know what it kind of reminds me of? This is kind of answering a question. I did actually, I mentioned this thing to you, and we don't need to watch it because we're not doing our prequel discussion yet. But the guy who does a series called What If the prequel trilogy was good? And of course that's right up my alley because I love talking about what if XYZ was good. And in his case, one of the things he says is that the prequel trilogy should have been about Obi-Wan as a main character and his kind of failure to save his friend from the dark side, which of course then sets up Obi-Wan's character in A New Hope, and then Luke, and then the original trilogy should be about Luke, and they said in the overarching story is about Darth Vader. And of course, when you put it like that, that is obviously the original trilogy, the prequels didn't quite do that, but that is such a kind of perfect little bow of, just Obi-Wan, Luke, Darth Vader going over it. And there's, I mean, obviously, for example, I mean, like we say, Kylo is far and away the best part of the sequel trilogy, but there's
he's not the main character.
Yeah, exactly, and who, I mean,
Rey's the main character, kind of, but she's not in the last battle at the end of The Last Jedi. She plays such a small role in that movie. Like, this thing is, like, this is the problem. Like, what are these movies? What are these the sequel trilogy about? Yeah, and like you can say, well, it should have been about Obi-Wan in the prequel trilogy, which I agree would have been good, but at least you can say in the prequel trilogy, it was about Anakin turning to the
Yeah,
dark side.
yeah. And Obi-Wan was
this
part
one,
of
there's
it.
no-
I mean,
Yeah,
Obi-Wan's
yeah, but in-
speech, you were supposed to destroy the dark side, not join it.
Yeah, so there's nothing like that in this sequel, and that obviously is awful.
Yes.
Because if you want to watch these sequels back, like in 20 years' time, I don't really see the point of doing so, because there'll be probably 3 disjointed, just incoherent movies that don't fit together. But also one more issue, Michael,
That's fine,
before
that's
I
fine.
hand over to you. There's also no context for how the First Order are doing in the
Oh,
their
goodness
quest
me, yeah,
to
that's
take over
so
the galaxy.
true, yeah.
Yeah, so the Empire clearly ruled the galaxy in the originals, and the prequels, the Republic was in charge. What's clear, it's pretty clear then. Obviously, there's no debate or whatever, or there's no people sat in the cinema wondering, I wonder how, if the Republic controlled the galaxy, or
Yeah.
I wonder if the Rebellion is up against the odds against the Empire. Now, there's none of that. It's pretty black and white. But in this sequel trilogy, that's not clear at all. Like, who's on top, the First Order or the Resistance? There's a throwaway line, like, the First Order could take charge in weeks. I remember that.
Oh yeah, there's
from The Last Jedi.
well, on a related note, if you'll remember, when we did The Last Jedi, I said that my first problem with the film was within the first 4 words of the opening crawl, where it just said the First Order reigns, and I was thinking to myself, just what? You know, I mean, yeah, like you say, there is no perspective. It's kind of like, you know how they say that during World
Yeah.
War One, Germany
Yeah.
thought that they were winning the war, or sorry, the average German citizen thought that they were winning the war, and therefore when
Yes.
Germany suddenly surrendered, it came as a complete shock to them. That's how I feel. I feel like
Yeah.
the rebels are Germany, and I'm a German citizen, and I'm just like, oh, the rebels are winning, and it's just like, oh, the First Order reigns, and it's like, hold on a minute.
Yeah, it doesn't even make sense because at the end of Episode 7, what
Yeah, the
was,
Order just
what
got
was supposed to
destroyed.
happen was that the Starkiller Base was destroyed, so it was a big win for the Resistance. So how come the First Order reigns after they just got their whole fucking base destroyed? I don't get that. Basically, without the context and without making it clear how dominant the First Order are, that it makes the fight less important, because you don't know how significant it is if the rebels defeat
Yeah.
the Empire, and you don't know how significant it is if the Empire actually defeat the rebels. Because like I said, you don't know who's meant to be winning. So if one defeats the other, you're like, well, I don't know. Is that an upset? Is that important, or was that what was expected to happen? What is the significance of that? So I think if the lack of story, obviously caused by lack of planning, is just absolutely awful.
Yeah.
It's really, really bad from Disney. It should have been the primary thing. Like when you're creating the Star Wars trilogy, the primary thing should have been like, okay, what is this going to be about? What is this arc going to be about? What's the first thing they should have done is figured out what the whole story was going to look like, but they didn't. Like in Episode 7, Rey is ambivalent to the Force. So this is me putting myself in Rian Johnson's shoes. So Rey's ambivalent to the Force in Episode 7, and we talked about that, like how she should really be like, oh wow, I've got the Force. Like she should say that to Finn. I have these amazing powers, but she doesn't care. Like because, like I said, the audience knows that she's meant to. So obviously the writers don't make her be like, oh wow, because everyone in the audience knows, and they only care about making the audience happy and not about the overall how the whole story makes sense in Episode 7. But anyway, that's for the previous video. Basically, I thought it'd be good if I was in Rian Johnson's shoes to explore whether Rey wanted the Force at all. Like she's got the Force, but does she really want it? Does she really need it? Like Luke Skywalker had the Force and he wanted to be a Jedi. Same with Anakin Skywalker. But what if you had this all-powerful Jedi that didn't know whether she actually wanted this power? And I think based on what happened in Episode 7, that's something you could set up in Episode 8. And it would be, that's what the story's about. Like whether Rey actually had this, was she going to use this power, or did she just want to be like a normal person with everyday life? It won't be the most exciting thing, but that's something I guess you could do. That's something that you have the potential to do because of what Episode 7 sets up. But obviously it's not about that. So
Yeah, you're right.
That's
you know,
basically
actually,
it.
you kind of made me. You said it a while ago now, but when you were talking about kind of the relative success of the First Order and things like that, it got me kind of thinking about the fact that at the end of The Last Jedi, we're told like the entire resistance is going to be destroyed because they're all in one base. And it kind of like, you think to yourself, oh, so okay, there's not a single other person on any planet, on any star system who's going to start another rebellion. You know, oh, it's just these people. And I realized what these films kind of do is they sort of turn the entire galaxy into the world's biggest passive protagonist. Because you're supposed to be rooting for the entire galaxy, and yet apparently the entire galaxy is a galaxy that can just, you know, trade hands between the ultimate good and the ultimate evil, and
not care.
Yeah, not care. Like basically the entire galaxy was like, hey, did you hear that these people who blow up entire planets are taking over? And then like, well, we'll just see how this handful of ragtags.
Yeah.
You know, there's no civil war. There's none of that.
Yeah. So that right there, that would not have happened in the prequels or the originals. But I can imagine people on Canto Blight being like, exactly like you said, like, oh, did you hear these First Order people have taken over? And then another person saying, oh, that's great for my business because I sell them weapons.
Yeah, actually, you know what? Sorry, I'm interrupting you a bit, but there's never a scene in the sequel trilogy so far where one planet fights as a whole. Because, for example, in the prequels, for example, there are Kashyyyk, you know, the Wookiee planet fights as a whole. You know, there are lots of entire planets fighting. In the original trilogy, Endor, which obviously is a planet, is technically a moon, but Endor, you know, fights as a whole. So, but in this film, there's no like planet saying we're going to fight. It's just, you know.
No, because there's no hatred for the First Order in these movies, and that's because the writers and the director, whatever, already know that you're meant. The audience knows that you're meant to hate the First Order, so they don't write it in because there's no need to make sure that everybody knows that these planets hate the First Order because we already know as the audience members that we're meant to hate the First Order. And yeah, it's just, again, disappointing. You have to write these movies as if you're watching, you're trying to show it to someone who has never seen Star Wars before and seeing it for the first time. Someone seeing Star Wars for the first time and watching Episode 7 and Episode 8, I don't think there's nowhere near, the level of hatred that they would experience, or maybe not hatred, but the level of dislike they would experience for the Empire is nowhere near as much as if they watched the original trilogy for the first time. Because the Empire there was like evil, and they made it clear they were on top, they were dominant, they were the power. And so obviously in that episode, I think, if you showed someone who never watched Star Wars ever before Episode 5, then they would have a fuller appreciation, or much, much more significant appreciation for why the Empire is evil. Yeah,
I've actually shown someone Star Wars who's never seen it before. And yeah, let's just say, I mean, obviously I think the sequels weren't out when we were watching it, but let's just say, I can't imagine there was half as much confusion as there would be watching the sequels. It was, you know, very simple to understand, and yeah, I think they enjoyed it. Anyway, now...
Context is key, Michael.
Context is key, yeah, exactly. So I wanted to kind of just talk about what I would do if I was in charge of Star Wars.
Go for it. I've talked for so long, so you
That's fine. Anyway, so I think the first thing is first, which is you've got to actually establish, I think, like I say, if you're going to have this massive world or massive galaxy and, you know, all sorts of stories happening in it, you need to have lots of planets, and they need to be planets that have, you know, distinct climates and a variety of climates, and it needs to be different histories on each planet. Like, I'm not saying, for example, you know, go full, like, you don't need to have Tolkien levels of mythos and world building for each individual planet, but at least, you know, let's get a couple of, maybe even like 1,000, and obviously not every single one has something happen on it, but, you know, and then, for example, you could have things being mentioned. Like, it would be, I almost think it would improve The Last Jedi ever so slightly more if Canto Blight, had been mentioned. I mean, obviously that would be a very minor thing, but then you'd be like, okay, so hey, look, we're seeing Canto Blight, you know. I mean, that's kind of one of the fun things about the prequels. There are a few moments, I can't actually think of one in particular, but I know that I remember thinking this. There's like moments where you're like, hey, we're seeing that place that was mentioned. You know, hey, we're seeing where the Wookiees come from. it feels like, oh yeah, we're seeing that thing that's kind of been established. So if you had that, obviously, you're making a big franchise, have it be like, okay, we already know all of the planets. So the writer's room, we've got the writer's room for Star Wars. They already know, they have an entire map of every inhabited planet in the galaxy. And like I say, maybe there's only 1,000 inhabited planets in the galaxy, maybe 500, whatever. And they say, okay, Obi-Wan Kenobi's just come back from a mission. Someone walks up to him and goes, how was Abu Debu? And then, they've got their own history of Abu Debu written down. And maybe it never even comes up, but, because they've got that in their head, it just feels like it's kind of like, I mentioned this before with reference to another film, but when actors will establish their own characters for someone they're playing, so they'll establish their own history for a character they're playing, and they'll establish kind of all sorts of stuff that never comes up in the film, like, what's their character's favourite colour, what's their character's favourite food, how many girlfriends has their character had, blah, 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 blah. And, you hear that that's what good actors do, and even though they may never mention any of those details, it, comes across in the performance. And I kind of feel like that's sort of how it would work on a world-building level. Now...
Yeah, I just want to say about that idea. I think I do like this idea, and I agree. You really like this idea, I can tell. But yeah, I think the extra bit of detail, that extra bit of thinking into the world, just makes it just gives it that extra edge, that extra level that can take a movie from being good to great. And obviously, it makes it more rewatchable as well. So yeah, I do completely agree with you that is something they could do if they cared, but I don't think they care that much.
Yes. Now, this is my general point. What they should be doing when they make these films is, I think, two general things. Number one, they should always be, I think, several trilogies ahead of the curve. So they're always thinking not only, what are we going to do next trilogy, but maybe even, what are we going to do in 3 trilogies' time. Not completely. I'm not suggesting they have an entire script written out, but being like, hey, when we do the third trilogy... Oh, actually, I just realised there's something that I should have written down under problems with the Star Wars franchise. I'm going to bring it up now, because it's relevant to planning.
Okay.
Sure. To me, the one thing that you gain from planning ahead completely is not jumping the shark. Because, obviously, I guess you know what jumping the shark is. In fact, you mentioned it,
yes.
Didn't you? So the problem is that if you don't plan ahead and you just say, hey guy, make this film, then the person that you've told to make this one film is going to think, okay, I'm making this one film, I'm going to put all of these awesome things in it. It's going to be the ultimate battle between good and evil, it's going to be the ultimate, romance, ultimate betrayal, ultimate twist. And obviously what's going to happen is, you're going to exhaust the franchise. There's only so many ultimate twists you can have, only so many, and each time, for example, they're like, oh, now we're going to have a character do something new with the Force. So, they've never done this before, but now we're going to have a character block a blaster bolt with the Force. Things like that. And obviously...
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, if they were planning ahead, if it was like, we say, okay, for example, no one would ever... If you force someone to sit down and write 100 trilogies, then, if they were like, hey, what if in trilogy 47 we had them blow up a Death Star, and then so I was like, what if in trilogy 48 we had them blow up an even bigger Death Star? Everyone would be like, no, that's stupid, because then what we're going to do in trilogy 49, have them blow up an even bigger Death Star. So obviously they'd be thinking okay, each big twist has its place in this vast expanding universe. We're not going to just throw everything we've got into the first. We're not going to throw every twist, every subversion, every blah blah into the first film. So that's why I think they should plan ahead a bit more. Like I say, that is something I should have put under problems with the Star Wars franchise.
Yeah. I just want to say on that, Michael, before you move on. I don't think they should do as many trilogies.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not literally suggesting that many.
I mean, it's not necessary. I think, but they should at least do one. They should at least plan one out.
Yes.
The fact that they didn't even do just one, again, goes back to the previous rant I had about not enough planning. But yeah, it's just unbelievably negligent. There we go, I said it. Go on.
Yes, I have a kind of two things to say, which is, I'm going to start with kind of the more controversial one. I think that if they're ever going to kind of, let's say, hypothetically speaking, this universe does eventually crumble into dust and they decide to reboot it, I think they should remake the original trilogy. And I think there are 2 reasons they should do this. Number one, it means that, we can watch the actual story that we like. not just, something that copies the actual story that we like, but exists in the same universe. We can watch the actual story that we like, and then they can say, okay, with this actual story that we like, we're going to throw in things that will actually set up what we want to do. So, we'll take, rewrite the original trilogy, thinking, all right, we do need to make this actually setting up some of the stuff, because obviously, like you say, the big thing with Force Awakens, it was, let's get something like what people liked before and use that to set up our new thing. But of course, that has the inevitable effect that it makes kind of the original trilogy, which is the entire basis for the success of the franchise, feel a bit redundant. And obviously, I realize it's kind of like it would be a very controversial thing to do, because people would say, hey, you can't remake it. But I honestly think it kind of needs to happen if you're going to say that if you're going to take this franchise, which is entirely popular because of the original trilogy, you need to make it so the original trilogy actually does set up some of the stuff. The second reason is because that way you can build off, you can have the actors that play Luke and Leia and things like that be young. And what that means is that you can actually have more stuff around that original trilogy, which kind of just makes more sense. The problem is that we're never going to see anything else happen with Luke and Leia. Luke's story is, we see him in the original trilogy, and then we see a horrible, terrible version of him in The Last Jedi. And when you put it like that, you realize that the new Star Wars films have somewhat irredeemably screwed Luke Skywalker.
Okay. I gotta say, I disagree with you on making the original trilogies, because, you could say, well, you could make put Luke Skywalker in more episodes, so that would be beneficial, but I don't think you do that. I think you create new characters. Luke Skywalker's story has ended, albeit badly, with The Last Jedi, but it's ended, it's gone. You now need to move on to new characters, because I just think that's the right approach. Just morally, I guess, which is, maybe not the best reason to do something, but I think, that's what I'd say. Did you have an idea, by the way, about remaking the prequels?
Yeah, well, they should definitely remake the prequels.
Yeah, remake the prequels. Yeah, you did say that. Okay, good.
I didn't actually say it yet. I was going to say it. So you kind of just, that was going to be my less, because I said I had two things to say, and I'll start with the most controversial. The most controversial is that they should remake the old trilogy. The least controversial, or less controversial, is that they should remake the prequels.
No, they should definitely remake the prequels,
Now,
that would be smart, because they need to, they got all this.
Yeah.
All this, and they got, they can't make a Star Wars episode every year. And if they're thinking for the next 20 years, how many episodes do we make or whatever, then definitely remaking the prequels, preferably after George Lucas dies. That'd be a good idea. And then you can obviously, I guess you're going to say the reasons why they should, but one of the reasons I think is just because the prequels were awful. It'd be nice to see them done decently.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's kind of that simple, just because they were done that simply. I'm actually I'm going to go into a more kind of fan fiction-y stuff. It's going to be still quite general, but this is my general theory on how they should set it up. I think they should have 4 concurrent timelines. And the reason why I think they should do this is because I think it would keep the films feeling fresh, and also would allow kind of each film to have the same actors doing, the kind of continuing their story, but not literally, every other year we check in with how's Luke Skywalker doing. So this is my theory on the four concurrent timelines they should have. They should have the new trilogy, which ironically starts with the original trilogy, the hypothetical remake of the original trilogy, and then, I mentioned this before, there's a Star Wars trilogy called Thrawn, which is a series of books. And the premise of Thrawn is basically that just because they've defeated the Empire, that doesn't mean that they've defeated, all the evil in the world. There are still generals who are loyal to the Empire. There are still planets that are loyal to the Empire. There are still, proxy dictators set up by the Empire. And obviously that works really well because it, sets up the premise that you need, like I say, for there to be an enduring antagonist throughout the series. So because, if you have the original trilogy remake, hypothetically, then, the next thing you could have is Luke Skywalker and all the gang being like, hold a minute, we still have to fight this other battle. So that's kind of the new thing. And then also, by the way, they should end with Galaxy War, which is a Star Wars. I found out some stuff about this. I found out the main Star Wars kind of storylines because I was curious. And and there's a one called Galaxy War, where a different galaxy invades, which I think really, if they're going to end somewhere, it should be on that, which works quite well. Now, the other series they should have is the prequel series, and of course, that should be the prequels. Now, yeah. I think they should have a quite long, spread out series where they also include. Are you familiar with the video games The Force Unleashed? It doesn't really. Yes. Yeah, basically it's about Darth Vader running around hunting the remaining Jedi. I think they should have the prequel trilogy leading into The Force Unleashed, and again, obviously, with the prequel trilogy, it should be kind of setting up Anakin's turn to the dark side. I actually do have a pet preference, which is that, and this is when I go back to my What If the Prequels Were Good series. The problem with the What If the Prequels Were Good series is that episodes 1 and 2 are really good. So, under the new series, under the new idea. Episode 1 and 2 are really good. But when you get to his What If Revenge of the Sith was good, you realize that Anakin just kind of, his transition isn't believable. Even though 1 and 2, they're really good, it gets to episode 3 and still Anakin's transition doesn't work. My theory is that they should actually have possibly 2 trilogies to establish Anakin's change. One being his kind of disenfranchisement with the Jedi, and then the second one actually having him go from disenfranchised to evil. Because I don't think you can have him go from, because what you've got to do is basically set up his character as a great Jedi, then have him become disenfranchised with the Jedi, and then have that disenfranchisement become not just evil, but the Darth Vader that you see in the original trilogy. It's very hard.
That doesn't. So you're asking for 6 episodes there?
Yeah. Well, basically, what I think is
that sounds better as like a TV show.
Oh well, you know what, Luke? Maybe TV shows could be incorporated into it. Anyway, now my other concurrent things are, number 1, they should have an ancient timeline, which deals with, of course, Knights of the Old Republic. Just because everyone talks about Knights of the Old Republic, I don't even know anything about Knights of the Old Republic.
Well, funnily enough, I'm just going to speak about that a bit later. But
okay, and then the final one is Origins, and the 2 narratives I have here are Power of the Jedi, and I think it's called, Dawn of the Jedi. I read my D as a P, and my A as an O, and my W as a W. Anyway, and then the other one is the Empire of the Sith. And basically, the reason why I think this is because you could have, for example, the certain ideas and themes, say, because all of these things will be happening at once, so, well, not at once, but for example, you would have your first trilogy might be, say, a remake of the original trilogy, and then your next trilogy might be the Star Wars prequel trilogy, and then a second Star Wars prequel trilogy, and then you have Thrawn, and it's kind of moving all over the place. But for example, you could have something where, say, in Empire of the Sith, set way back in the Origins thing, you have this ancient mystic thing set up, and then you move into the new trilogy, and the storyline of that new trilogy directly relates to something set up in Dawn of the Sith. So basically, I just like the vast expansiveness of it.
Okay. Well, I just want to say, Michael, right there, you've laid all those ideas.
Yes, I think I'm done with them.
And they're detailed, which is good. You've thought about them, but there's a lot of Star Wars there. And if we look at the future of Star Wars, which is the segment I want to go on to now, I think this is a good segue since you've talked about what they should do in the future. Obviously, like I just said, there's a lot right there of Star Wars. But I think I've talked before about how special Star Wars is. It's unique in that, and I just think Star Wars would be less special if they started pumping out all these Star Wars episodes.
I guess I should. Sorry, I was just going to say, just as a preemptive thing. I'm kind of assuming that they're going to have to keep making them. Obviously, it's easier to just say, well, keep it limited. But yeah,
yeah. Well, I think it makes sense to keep it limited.
Yeah.
It makes sense to keep your powder dry and not absolutely go for it and just bring out like 2 Star Wars movies each year, or even just 1 a year. I think is probably too much, because that again makes Star Wars not special. I mean, it's already started with, you got these 2 solo, 2 standalone movies, Solo, a Star Wars story, and Rogue One, and in between this trilogy. So you've got 5 Star Wars episodes in 5 years. It just makes it feel less special. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why Solo, a Star Wars story, did not do so well, It's because the fact that, well, we just had a Star Wars like 4 months ago. Yes, there was the backlash to The Last Jedi, but it's not like, oh wow, Star Wars is here. It's like, well, we just had it. Like, I don't really want to go and see it again. And that's a problem for Disney, and it could be something that if they're not careful could keep happening. Like the episode fucking 11, whenever that happens, like maybe people just don't go see it because they've had so much Star Wars already, in the last few years, and they just can't be bothered to do it again. Like less is more, Michael. Less is more, particularly when Star Wars is concerned because of how special it is. So I just want to go through, Michael, what Star Wars have got planned.
Oh, you know what? Sorry, I do want to interrupt you on one point. Well, literally the most minor point, but I think they already have a third anthology film planned for release directly after Episode 9, and I think it's going to be an Obi-Wan Kenobi standalone film.
Well,
so
yes.
There we go. Just for the record.
Yes. So that'll be 6 in 6 years now for Star Wars. And back in the day, it was once every 3 years.
Yeah.
So there is going to be, Lucasfilm has already announced that The Last Jedi writer-director Rian Johnson will be creating his own new Star Wars trilogy. So that'll probably be episodes 10, 11, and 12, you would assume. And these might be not, because I didn't like The Last Jedi, but this trilogy might not be that bad, obviously, because he won't be focused on shocking people and subverting expectations, unless he does actually do that, which would be pretty crazy. But yeah, I think Rian Johnson, I don't know if he'll be good, but it's just good to give it just to one person, and just let them do that. Then, Star Wars have also announced that Game of Thrones showrunners are going to be writing a new Star Wars film series. So again, that's probably going to be another trilogy. So it's going to be David Benioff and D.B. Weiss are going to write and produce a new series of Star Wars films, and they announced that in February. So that might be the Knights of the Old Republic thing that you were alluding to earlier.
Yeah, that could be interesting.
That could be that. And then you've also got some more standalone films. So you've got Boba Fett. That's definitely going to happen, I think. There might be a Jabba one, I'm not sure. And there will probably be an Obi-Wan film as well, standalone film. It could be that one you talked about after Episode 9. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's a load of Star Wars coming up. There's just an absolute fuck ton, certainly compared to how it was previously dished up. So, I mean, I guess Disney wants to milk this because it's Star Wars, but I see a scenario in which we get to like 2030 and Star Wars there's just not that much hype for it. There's just not that much excitement to it. And Star Wars, the allure of Star Wars has just gone, and people just treat it like it's a Marvel movie. And maybe that's what Disney want, like another Marvel sort of thing. But like, that's not what Star Wars is, and it'd be a real shame if they did that. Not just because I think it would be a real shame, but I think like long term it would actually diminish their profits, because less is more. If you make something less special, then people won't go to see it as much. It's just like anything in life. Like if diamonds were freely available, like diamonds wouldn't be special. So, like Star Wars, maybe the comparison to it being a diamond isn't the best, but it's certainly, in terms of movies and films, one of the most popular things ever created.
Wait, so what I'm getting from this, Luke, is that you think that Disney should prop up lots of African dictators in order to use poorly paid workers to mine for Star Wars, and then artificially keep lots and lots of Star Warses out of circulation in order to cause a unreasonably inflated price relative to the net supply of Star Warses.
Yes, I realise that, yes. Yes, diamonds are more readily available than...
Well, as you found, you kind of make a good point, because in theory, there are infinite Star Warses available in the minds of talentless hacks, and the job of a company is to say, well, let's not, let's limit
pick
them.
this one now,
yes,
and then in 2 years, let's do that one.
Yes, exactly.
That would be good. So you know what, actually, Michael, the comparison was fucking brilliant.
Yes, exactly.
I didn't even know.
Better than you thought.
Yeah, even better than I thought. So that's just my thoughts on the future of Star Wars.
Yes.
I think it is very bleak, and although I didn't have any interest, I had a tiny bit of interest to see Solo: A Star Wars Story. I can imagine, if Solo: A Star Wars Story was released in Christmas, or even a year from now, I'd have more.
Yeah, I don't know why, because
I just didn't care.
Yeah, I don't know why they did it so close to each other, to be honest.
I know.
Yeah.
It's awful. Like, particularly when there's a lot of big movies been released this spring. Like, just from a planning perspective, it's bad. But even if you're, even if you want to treat them, even if like it made sense because there was no other big movies coming out, like the Avengers wasn't coming out or Deadpool wasn't coming out around the same time, it still won't make sense to put it just 4 months later. Put it like a year later. Put it in Christmas. Put it in 2019 because like people just get so like you don't want Star Wars to be grossing like 600 million like some Marvel movies do. Like that's Ant-Man will probably gross that when it comes out in July or whatever. It'll just probably gross 600 million. Like you don't want Star Wars to be that. You want Star Wars to be something special where loads of people will go into it like it's a cultural event, like it's a phenomenon. That's what I want Star Wars to be, and that's what I think what Disney should also want Star Wars to be. So all these Star Wars movies, I am against it, and I hope they reconsider, and I hope they space it out a lot. And yeah, I don't have high hopes for the future of Star Wars. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I think, obviously, I think it would be slightly better to do, because obviously I guess they are actually going to do something where they have it all happening in different timelines. If the Game of Thrones thing is going to be in Kotor, as they say, Knights of the Old Republic. And I suppose that will somewhat help, because obviously in that case it's kind of, here's the thing, okay. If, hypothetically speaking, let's imagine that the current trilogy was good. And then, after that, there were 6 years of Knights of the Old Republic and Knights of the Old Republic anthology films. And then, after those 6 years, then we had the return to the new trilogies. So then we had, for example, something happening with Kylo Ren. Obviously, it's hard to know what it would be like in some kind of weird mystical kingdom where the current, sequel trilogy was good. But I suppose, obviously, I do think there's some utility to, I was going to say the word utility to utilizing. That's very poor, very redundant English, but there's some utility to utilizing the expansive timeline of Star Wars to their advantage. Like, if they want to really, make loads of them, then they may be able to add a push if they make genuinely good films, have people be excited for seeing what happens in this particular timeline. So rather than people thinking, oh, it's another Star Wars film, people might be like, hey, it's a Star Wars film that's dealing with this particular storyline. They haven't dealt with this particular storyline before. Again, I think that is very...
I don't think casual fans are like that, though.
Yeah, to be honest.
I really don't.
To be honest, I really think that they should just be trying to please me. Anyway.
Yeah, so that's what it comes down to, I guess. Star Wars fans will be happy with all this, but people who like movies, like obviously I'm more of a guy who likes movies than Star Wars, like they will, hopefully, they will be like, nah, this is too much. Like, they shouldn't be doing this.
Anyway, are we going to... are we good to talk about the fandom now, on that note?
Yes. So, we originally, I don't think we're going to talk about the fandom, but because of what happened just a few days ago, I think it's very much necessary. Obviously, we've been talking about the Star Wars universe, and that's just like what Disney should do, how the sequels went, but there is another side to the whole Star Wars discussion that we need to talk about, which is how the fans, I guess, are. And the reason why I'm bringing up the fan base, and as I'm sure you've heard, Michael, there was a story a few days ago in which Kelly Marie Tran, the actress who plays Rose in The Last Jedi, Finn's friend, remember that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay, the character is utterly stupid, but, that doesn't excuse
She was harassed?
She was harassed and forced off Instagram. She was bullied or called racist names or sexist names or whatever, and she was forced to delete her Instagram. And this is something that I think, obviously, this happened like 2 days ago, so I think it's good for us to talk about.
To be honest, I heard about it through a Twitter joke. This guy on Twitter posted a comment, and it was like, fake Star Wars, no, it was kind of like a fake nerd girl. I love Star Wars. Real fanboy. Oh, really? Harass 5 fan members now. Harass 5 cast members now. And that's kind of, that is, yes, it's what they call a satirical comment.
That's a good joke. very much displaying the toxicity of the Star Wars fan base. It was actually a pro-straight white male hero group who, that is the case, who took credit for running Star Wars actress Kelly Marie Tran off Twitter. Off Instagram. So she has suffered months of racist and sexist abuse on social media following The Last Jedi. That is because, so obviously, number one, just before we go into like the Star Wars fan base, she didn't make the decision to. Yeah, that was Ryan Johnson, who has also been harassed, but that does not make it, not in a sexist and racist way, I imagine, but that doesn't make it okay to harass him either. Because after all, it's just a movie. It's just a movie. But yeah, she did not make the decision. Rose made some unbelievably stupid decisions, and she was an awful character. But that is not the actress's fault. There is no point in going after the actress. She did what she was told to do. You don't go after the actress. I mean, talking about her acting job, I think she was fine. Acting in Star Wars isn't always the best, but she was fine. She was passable. So Kelly Marie Tran didn't actually do anything wrong. So that's just for starters.
Yeah.
It's pointless to even go after her. It's stupid to even go after her, even if it, even if it was not a bad thing to do. And obviously it is a bad thing to do, particularly the sexist and racist abuse. But I just want to go into the Star Wars fan base, but do you have any comments on that?
Well, yeah, you know what? It kind of reminds me of I think her name's Terry Jones, the black woman in Ghostbusters.
Leslie Jones.
Leslie Jones. Okay. Oh, yeah. I feel like Terry Jones is an actual person. But anyway, so do you know someone called Milo Yiannopoulos?
Yes.
I think you should.
Of course, I know who Milo.
Yeah. Okay. He called her a gorilla on Twitter, and then I think he I don't know exactly what his words were, but it's very much, the implication was that he told his fans to go and harass her because it was her fault that Ghostbusters was bad. And then he got the best thing about it is that obviously he got banned from Twitter for instigating.
Oh yeah, I remember that day, and he was the top trend. Yeah,
and then
was like,
people were like, "Hey, this is an attack on free speech." It's like, what? He sent loads of his fans to go harass a woman with racist, because of a movie.
It's like people protesting right now, the Free Tommy Robinson parade.
Yeah,
and it's like he objectively broke the law. That is why he is in prison. That is the only reason why he is in there. He broke the law. If he didn't want to be in prison, don't break the law.
Yeah.
You can say he's being a martyr and he wants to do that. But don't complain about it and say Free Tommy.
Yeah, it's just so weird.
Do you not understand anything? Sorry.
Yes, it's so. It doesn't. People, I mean, to be honest, I feel like we could talk a lot about people's misapprehensions about freedom of speech, but no, that's not.
Particular section of the political spectrum's misapprehension of free speech.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, why did they go
being banned from Twitter is a breach of my First Amendment rights.
Yeah, and the fucking the best one is not sponsoring YouTube videos or not. It's like, no, it's not even censorship because you're still allowed to put your YouTube videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
You just can't make money off it, so it's not even censorship. It's
funny because these are the same people who are likely to say that taxation is theft. So legally, companies should be forced to pay them to spread their shitty opinions. But if you want a company to pay for health insurance, then you're a socialist.
Oh god! Why did they go after Leslie Jones? By the way, I haven't seen the movie, but she was probably the least.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Important of the 4 Ghostbusters, because she obviously the 3 white characters were the 3 scientists, and she was the one working in the New York subway station, I believe.
No, you know why it actually is. It's because a lot of people didn't actually see the Ghostbusters film, and they just based their opinion on the trailers, and she was the most cringeworthy part of the trailers. I feel like so it's that, and also probably racism.
Yeah. But again, it's not her fault.
Yeah, again,
it's the director. But again, you shouldn't even go after the director. Anyway,
it's a pyramid of unjustified.
Yeah. So we'll move on though. I just want to talk about the Star Wars fan base though in general, because they forced Kelly Marie Tran off Twitter. She's of course Asian. They threw a lot of racist and sexist remarks towards her. And there is this cognitive dissonance between being a Star Wars fan. Not all Star Wars fans are like this, obviously, but there is a section of Star Wars fans who you would describe as alt-right. Have you got a better description?
I'd say alt for wrong.
Yes, okay. The kind of people who would be in a straight white male hero group. That kind of people. Because obviously straight white males are the most oppressed people in the world. And obviously, like, that's actually
the best sentence I've ever heard. Straight white male heroes group.
Fucking hell, like that. Oh god, they're so insecure. I'm one of that group. I'm a straight white male.
You know what I saw that was really
need to join a group.
The best meme I saw. So you know in Harry Potter when Dudley goes 36 presents, 36, but last year I had 37. There was this meme I saw which was 36 white male protagonists, 36, but last year I had 37. Which literally sums up the attitude, yeah.
Like, you've summed it up well. Like, if there was a fascist dictatorship, like, that took over, like, after Brexit, even though it's probably not going to happen, but there's like a 0.1% chance, like, we would be fine. Because we're straight, white, and male. We would be, we would be sound.
Yeah,
like,
it wouldn't even bother me.
Life wouldn't be that great, but it would, like, we'd have more power, Yeah. Like, and that's the reality of the situation. Like, straight white males do not need a hero group. And the people who think that they do are, I think, racist. And I think that is not a controversial thing to say. They are members of, obviously, the alt-right group who are notoriously racist and all that. But I just want to talk about, I've said this for like 3 times, being a alt-right member and a Star Wars fan. Because there is a cognitive dissonance there.
Yes.
Because, like, when you're watching Star Wars, you're presumably not cheering for the Empire, even though they are meant to be the fascists. The rebellion is all about diversity and equality. Like, you've got a lot of aliens, you've got a lot of women in powerful positions, whereas the Empire, it's all white, all male, like very patriarchal and, racist, certainly in the original trilogy, and all human as well, which is another important factor. They're clearly meant to be the fascists. Yet these alt-right people like Star Wars, which just goes to show they don't really get it. Like, they don't really understand Star Wars, which of course lends to the idea that these people aren't actually that intelligent at all. Even in the prequels, like the Republican Padme, in particular, were against fascism. Like, Padme says that line, "This is how democracy dies with thunderous applause," or whatever, in clear reference to the fact that fascism is bad, and extreme right-wing politics and authoritarianism and all that is bad. And yeah, this cognitive dissonance is just hilarious in Star Wars fans, but it's obviously also quite sad.
Yeah, I think part of it is because, I mean, obviously you have you can see this cognitive dissonance even outside of Star Wars if you look at the election of Donald Trump as an anti-establishment person.
Yes, well, just Republican voters in general, they're often quite poor. They vote for people who actually vote against their own interests, their voters' own interests, which is crazy. Like, the cognitive dissonance in the Republican Party is crazy.
Yeah, I think the problem with like the whole white male ethos in general is that there's, ever since the Enlightenment, there's been this narrative of kind of fighting back against authority, which is really, easy to get behind when the authority is, corrupt, tyrannical kings and oppressive colonial empires you have to fight, obviously only if they're colonizing white people, as in the American Revolutionary War. But of course, what white people, or white men in particular, have had to confront since, kind of the early 20th century is that they are an oppressive, structurally oppressive, obviously not, oppressive on an individual level, but the various social constructs and socioeconomic paradigms that have been established by white men that to this day help white men are directly oppressing, black people and women. The reason why we have, for example, even a show like this show would be different fundamentally if we were both women. We take for granted the fact that we're just men, we can come here, we can talk about films, and people go, oh look, it's 2 people talking about films. If we were women, number one, we would be just kind of, it would be, women talking about films already. And then number 2, we'd probably get, if we ever got popular enough, harassed for saying something like, we like Star Wars. Yeah,
so if we were women and we got views, which we don't, but if we did, then definitely there would be people shouting at us and saying, awful things. If we made if we made a slight against one of the movies, and that is the reality. And you summed it up pretty well. That was very very intelligent what you just said.
Thank you.
Very well thought out. I appreciate that. That's good. That's why people don't listen.
Because they're all stupid.
Yeah.
We're just the two only intelligent people on the internet.
Yes, exactly. That was a good discussion. The Star Wars fan base is toxic, and it's only going to get worse. And the more Disney tries to do this diversity stuff, which they don't really do anyway, because the main characters are still white, but whatever. The more they try to make Star Wars more diverse, the more backlash there's going to be. And Star Wars fans, younger Star Wars fans, it's just really like they just expose how stupid they are, because if they genuinely are alt-right and a Star Wars fan, well, if you are alt-right, then you should not be a Star Wars fan, because it goes against your core beliefs. But it's not going to stop. It's going to get worse, and I think talking about fan bases, Star Wars is number one for the worst fan base.
Yeah, I mean, I can't DC's pretty bad, I think, but DC's bad for different reasons. I don't think DC's as socially problematic. I think DC are just ridiculous.
Yes, they are. They're the most deluded fan base. DC. That's a good summary. Star Wars fans are also deluded. Well, these people are. Anyway, they're also deluded, but they are also bigots, which is worse. So that's pretty much it.
Yes, pretty much it. All right.
Pretty much it. Okay, so do you want to wrap up now?
Yeah. So what did you think of the film, Luke?
I thought it was great.
So I'm not sure exactly what. Well, we'll say.
You know what? I'll do it, Mike.
Yeah, you wrap up.
Yeah. So we have been selecting and reflecting on the Star Wars universe. All aspects of it, from the world building to the problems with the sequels, to the future of Star Wars, to the Force, the lack of story. All of this stuff. If you've been listening, we hope you've learned a few things, and we hope you've had a good time doing so. I've been Luke. Who have you been, Michael?
I've been Michael.
And thank you for listening to Select and Reflect. We'll see you soon when we'll be talking about Jurassic World, I believe.
Oh, have you seen the reviews for Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom?
No, I haven't, no.
It's bad. It got
worse than
60% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I think 52% on Metacritic. Which is, I think it's similar to Jurassic World, the first one, I think, but I think it might be slightly worse.
Judging by the trailers, I'm not surprised.
Yes. So, that's fun.